All right, whenever you are ready.
All right, I got the quote, a verbal contract is in the paper it's written on by gold dwelling. And I would have to personally agree with it because if nothing was written in the contract, then there would be no organization in the world. We would fail to do what we promised to do. And it would also wouldn't create any deterrence towards certain consequences that we did. For example, like at work, if you fail to do something, you get a verbal warning, and then if you keep doing it again, you get a write-up, and then that like deters you from doing it again and eventually being able to do things correctly. And another one, if we didn't have contracts, for example, like when we get a loan or something like that, we would just say, oh, well, I didn't know this and this and that. We did this and that was in the contract, but then it's written in the contract, you signed it, and they hold you against you. And then lastly, there wouldn't be any organization because we would just fail to do what we said we were going to do, and that's it. So, once again, I do agree with this quote, a verbal contract isn't worth the paper it's written on by Golden One. Thank you.
All right, well, you used the quote as the attention device. That's always a little bit problematic, but your thesis statement was relatively clear. It sounded like you had a preview, but you're rushing so quickly that it's hard to tell if it's a preview or if you've just started your speech. The content, I think you've got a couple of good ideas, and in fact, in the body of the speech, I can tell there is an organizational structure, but everything stays at a very abstract level, and so as a consequence, you go through this material very quickly and have little chance to develop any personality or relationship with the audience or to kind of explain ideas in depth and make them a little more interesting to us. They just go by very quickly. Your presentation issues, you've got kind of a low-key way of addressing the audience. Your voice is quiet. It's easy enough to hear, but it does seem like the energy level's down, and I think you could use a little bit more energy in a couple of spots. It did feel a little bit like you were rushing during the presentation. Your gestures are very animated at one point, I think especially when you're on the second point. It wasn't quite clear how all of those gestures were connected to either the idea you were talking about or indicative of an emotion that you were having at the time, but you weren't being a passive person giving the presentation. You did seem like you were trying to get more actively involved in the presentation at that point. I didn't think that you were particularly expressive with your facial expressions, maybe an occasional little bit of nervousness. I think you could be a little bit more assertive about that. The eye contact was okay for as long as you were up there. Posture, I didn't notice anything that was problematic, but it was a relatively short speech, so you don't really get much chance to get into the presentation. I did think at the conclusion of the speech, even though the body hadn't been reviewed, you did come back to the point that you were trying to make and remind us how you felt, although I'm going to have to watch it again because it sounded almost like you went the opposite direction at the end of the speech. I'll have to double check that. I'm not sure. All right, thank you.